I'd like to start. As I said when we began the program, we initially planned that this Learnathon, which I think this is our second or third year we're doing a PrePurim Learnathon here at Bnai Torah, but we had initially planned that the learning should be for Refuah Shlema for Paul, at the time Pesach David ben Adel. And as everybody knows, that didn't turn out that way, so it ends up being instead L'ilui Nishmaso, in memory of Pesach David ben Avram, somebody who I just enjoyed so much over the years. In every shul where we run a program, we have a different relationship, and there are different point people you interact with. And Bnai Torah, it's always more of a committee than one particular person. So we want to run a program, so generally it involves contacting Rav Asher Frankel and Andrea and also Paul and Alan and trying to, and yes, and Layla also, sorry, that doesn't happen. But yeah, inevitably many of the tasks would be left to Paul, who was very glad. I remember at the Levaya thinking to myself, how many people had the same experience that I did with him? That no job was too big and no job was too small. Whatever it was, he would take care of it. And inevitably after the fact, you start to remember things and then wonder if you were remembering things, you remember what you think happened. But I seem to remember also walking in for the cheesecake party on Shavuos before the shiur that I would give on the second afternoon and seeing Paul in an apron serving that. It's not just me making that up. That was actually, okay, thank you for the confirmation. But really just a tremendous, tremendous person, and made an impact on many, many people in his various roles. And so it's an honor for us to be able to do this in his memory. Yehי zichro baruch. The topic that I'm speaking about this morning is, we called it on the sheet, the book of Achashverosh. Rabbi Bergman already alluded to the idea that the entire book may be viewed as the book of Achashverosh, but I want to actually focus on Perek Tet, chapter 10 of Megillat Esther, which I didn't put on the sheet. I apologize, but you have Chumashim if anyone wants to. I'm going to read it out either way, but it's page 1261 if you're using the stone Chumash. It is in the back. Vayasem hamelach Achashverosh mas al haaretz v'iyei hayam. Achashverosh places a tax on the land and on islands of the sea, on the shores. Iyei hayam can be translated in different ways. V'chol ma'asei sakpo v'rasahu farashas gidulas Mordechai asher gidulau hamelech, and all of the records of his might, meaning the might of Achashverosh, all the things he did, as well as an account of Gedulat Mordechai, the greatness of Mordechai, Asher Gedulau HaMelech, who was elevated by the king. Halohem Kesuvim al Sefer Divrei Ha'amim L'Malchei Madai Foras. They're recorded in the chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia. Ki Mordechai HaYehudi Mishnah LaMelech Achashverosh. Because Mordechai, the Jew, was second in command to Achashverosh. V'gadol LaYehudim. Great for the Jews. Ratzui L'Rov Echav. Beloved by, I'm going to translate right now, many of his brethren. If you were to take a look on the sheet in the medrash that I brought you there in source number 1, it says perhaps it should be read as beloved by most of his brethren, because no one gets everybody. Fine. Doresh tov le'amo v'dover shalom l'chol zaro. He sought good for his nation. He spoke peace, dover shalom, they say here, concerned for the welfare. Okay, l'chol zaro, for all of his descendants. It's such a nice, innocent, quiet chapter, right? After all the excitement of the Megillah, after all of the danger, and yes, the satire as well, but the wars of chapter 8, chapter 9, it's all gone. The threats are over. Esther is queen. Mordechai is the viceroy. We ride into the sunset. Chapter 10, we didn't make the chapter breaks. It's not, the chapter breaks come from the church, not from us. Nonetheless, you sort of ask yourself, what does this add? What is the message here? And the protagonist at this stage, the protagonist in chapter 10, I gave it away by titling the shir, is really, to my mind, Achashverosh. It is. Verse 1, Achashverosh made a tax. Right? That's number 1. When I learned Megillah, in some years, I paused. Vayasam HaMelech Achashverosh mas, to see if anyone will boo. You have to be a tuned-in crowd in order to boo at that point. But Achashverosh declares a tax over everybody. Second pasuk, he is great and he is mighty, and Mordechai is great because the king made him mighty too. And then the last pasuk, sure, Mordechai is great. He's Mishneh LaMelech Achashverosh. He's the viceroy of Achashverosh. Who did not appear at all in this chapter? Esther. Esther's not there. Mordechai is there as a function of the king. Haman is long gone, right? We're done with Haman's at that stage. But what message are we supposed to see in concluding the Megillah with a description of the power of Achashverosh? Why would you do this? What would you say? Why conclude Megillat Esther with an ode to Achashverosh? You tell me.
Send it out next year to the people.
Yeah, you want to be able to publish this book, right? It's a good idea, as a general principle, to try to get into the king's good graces. Gerald, that was you going to say?
This wasn't a complete redemption, as it says when he's been on Hollow. He's still there.
All right, so Gerald points out that this could be read as a reminder, right? It could be that this is just sort of a word to our sponsor, or a word about our sponsor. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that it's a note that you shouldn't think that everything is fine. Achashverosh is still in charge. We're not, not everything is wonderful. You did hear from Rabbi Hecht, we're now back in Israel at this stage in history and building the second Beis HaMikdash. But make no mistake, if you read Ezra and Nehemiah carefully, you realize the Beis HaMikdash was sort of the religious version of Scotia Bank Center, in the sense that it's the Persian Empire temple of the Jews. It's very much a Persian Empire building. You're under Achashverosh. Paul, you were going to say?
I'm just going to say that there's always going to be an Achashverosh, and don't worry because God could topple him again.
There's always going to be an Achashverosh. Hark back to Rav Sammy's point. Good as well. I'd like to add something. I think these are all fine answers, and I think that there's truth to all of them, actually. But one more note here. The tax that Achashverosh places. What do you add to the story by mentioning that Achashverosh taxed everybody? So take a look on your sheet, please. Source number 2. Rabbi Avram Ibn Ezra offers one suggestion. He says it fits into the context in chapter 10. We talk about Achashverosh, we talk about what Mordechai did for him. So I'm reading my English translation in the interests of time. You can see the original Hebrew as well. The text mentioned this to teach that Achashverosh, succeeded in all of his ways, including taxation. His might was visible. Why? Because Mordechai was his viceroy. Because Mordechai was working for him, therefore Achashverosh was able to collect the tax funds. That's Ibn Ezra. The Maharal, in his Or Chadash, which is a commentary to Megillas Esther, says no. It's actually back to chapter 9. The context is what came before this, which was the war against the enemies of the Jews. Maharal writes in number 3, because of the great deed Achashverosh, performed upon Haman, Achashverosh's throne was feared. The fact that he executed Haman, he executed his kids, and carried out this war against his supporters, or at least allowed it. So everyone said, you know what? I think we're going to pay the tax. I think we're good. What's that? You want to tax us more? Okay. It's an intimidation that's being spelled out here in the view of the Maharal in his commentary to Megillas Esther. However, the Maharal has another work called Ner Mitzvah, in which he talks about the 4 empires among whom the Jews have been exiled. In Yanei Arba Malchuyot. And he offers another explanation here, and it's a major insight at the end of Esther. It's going to fit in with Rav Sammy's shir from before as well, about what Achashverosh is like. And the Talmud said, it's describing or explaining a vision of Daniel. Daniel has a vision of 4 beasts, one of which is a bear, and the beasts are supposed to correspond to different empires. So the second one here is like a bear. I apologize right now for anyone who the Maharal is about to offend by quoting this Gemara. Rabbi Yosef taught the bear is a reference to the Persians, who eat and drink like a bear, who are fleshy like a bear, who are hairy like a bear, who are restless like a bear. I don't take any credit for it. This is the source. I gave a share actually that related to this at some point in the past, but right now that's not our topic. But he says they, the Persians, perpetually seek to swallow up. This is their trait. Thus it is written regarding this empire, Persia, in Esther, King Ahasuerus placed a tax on the land and the islands of the sea. What does this come to teach? Saying the king placed a tax on the land. That's not news. Only it comes to say that this was the strength of Ahasuerus that he was lacking, and he perpetually sought to fill his desire with wealth. His strength, the salient characteristic of Ahasuerus is that he feels a need. There's something that he wants. Ahasuerus always wants more. So at the end of the Megillah, whole story is over. Ahasuerus wants more. That's the idea, which is remarkable because, of course, we know the Gemara says he reigns over everything, right? Hodu ve'Kush, however you read those lands. But that's the hunger of Ahasuerus, and it's consistent with the start of the Megillah as well, in which Ahasuerus is the dominant figure. He's sitting on the throne. He throws a party, and again, we find hunger. 6-month party, followed by a 7-day party, lots of drinking, which continues throughout the Megillah. The women are brought to the kingdom. Each of them comes to him for just one night, and then they go off to the harem. The message at the start of the Megillah is that Ahasuerus is a hungry person, and the message at the end of the Megillah is that Ahasuerus is a hungry person. What does that mean when you identify somebody as a hungry person? When you say somebody has to continually amass more, what's the message?
They have low self-esteem.
Low self-esteem.
It's a sickness.
It's a sickness. So I brought you in source number 5, the Goldwater Rule. Because this is something that I think is important to keep in mind when we try to analyze people who appear in Tanakh. The Goldwater Rule, for those who are not familiar, is the informal name given to Section 7 in the American Psychiatric Association's Principles in Medical Ethics, which states that it is unethical for psychiatrists to give a professional opinion about public figures whom they have not examined in person and from whom they have not obtained consent to discuss their mental health in public statements. It is named after former U.S. Senator and 1964 presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. And for those who know his story, that's fine. Not a discussion for today either. I am not making any Ahasuerus connections. That wasn't the point. My point is only that when we read about people in Tanakh, we tend to have a sense of familiarity as though we know them. And we start talking about them as though they have particular traits. And it's a bit of a dangerous game. Having said that, that's exactly what I'm about to do. So I'm apologizing in advance. But this is, I think this is a time-honored tradition. Hunger can be an expression of bald appetite. It can be a physiological problem. But often physical appetites conceal an inner psychological neediness, and I think that may be the case here. He is hungry, and again, some of this goes back to what Rabbi Bergman had discussed in the first year. He's hungry for respect, and he's hungry for a feeling of security. Respect. Right? Go back to the beginning of the Megillah, and here in number 6, I just gave you references to the verses rather than bring them all on the sheet. Who in the world throws a 6-month party demanding that dignitaries from all over the empire show up? Right? When you learn Megillah Esther, you have to understand, why is this a 6-month party? So you could give different explanations, including because Ahasuerus likes his parties. But odds are it's not that. It takes 6 months to get all the dignitaries from 127 lands coordinated to actually be there at different times. It's not as though they're all showing up. The entire Persian Empire, all the administration from the entire Persian Empire is going to be in the palace at the same time. The empire is just being run by what? It doesn't work that way. It's 6 months in order to match everybody's schedule so you can get the dignitaries from the entire empire to show up. Or consider this. Vashti refuses to show up. What does Ahasuerus do when Vashti refuses to show up? No, before she's going to be asking, what does he do? Calls a meeting of whom? Sorry? You have to realize who it is that he assembles for this conversation. He calls the experts. That was his procedure. He went to the people who know the law, and then we list them all. The people who are ro'ei pnei hamelech, who see the king, hayoshvim rishona b'malchut, who sit first by the throne. He is assembling the best minds he has, the political geniuses. Why? Kedas malasos b'malka vashti, because he wants to know what to do, because my wife didn't listen to me. Really? Is this a matter for a political advisor? I mean, and then his verdict emerges, and he says, let me send a message to my entire kingdom. Right? You want to talk satire here. Right? The king, who's really embarrassed that his wife wouldn't show up, has now made it an empire-wide matter. He's told everybody that his wife wouldn't show up. It is so strange that the Gemara has to come out of this and say, in source number 7, that it was a political affair in the first place. He had married Belshazzar's daughter. His power only came through her. And therefore, this really is a matter of the throne in some sense. Because it's just so hard to believe that somebody would be so hungry for respect that he's going to make it literally a federal matter when his wife didn't come out to the party. And then, you go further along, and Achashverosh has the contest to choose a queen, and who does he pick? The one who has no background, right? The one who will tell anybody where she is from, right? Esther, of course. But why does he pick somebody who brings nothing to the table? Because he wants someone who brings nothing to the table. He wants somebody who he doesn't have to worry will not respect him. It plays out through the Megillah. It plays out, of course, with Haman. Haman's sales pitch, there's this nation that doesn't listen to you. How? Off with their heads, right? It's an immediate reaction for him. I brought you the Gemara in Megillah in source number 9. I'm skipping number 8, but you can take a look at it. But if you take a look at source number 9, at Haman's sales pitch, what does he say to him? He says, their law is different from that of any other nation. They don't eat from ours. They don't marry from ours. They don't marry theirs to us. They spend the entire year saying, today's Shabbos, today's Pesach, I can't go to work. They eat and drink and mock the throne. If a fly would fall into the cup of one of them, he would get rid of the fly and he would drink it. You try touching their wine and see if they drink. It's all about lack of respect for Achashverosh. And here's an interesting note that Maharal picks up on. Haman says, I'd like to pay you for the destruction of the Jews. I'll fund it. What does Achashverosh say back? Hakesef natun lach. What does that mean?
No, I'll fund it.
That's not quite what it says. Usually we translate it as, I'll fund it. Right? That's not what he said.
On account to you.
The money is given to you. The money is given to you. What does that mean? Look what the Maharal says in source number 10. Because Achashverosh perpetually sought to swallow up, he said to Haman, the money is given to you, not I don't want your money. I accept it from you, I give it back to you. He didn't hold on to it. It would have been disgraceful for him to accept money and to give a nation for execution for the sake of money. If it looks like he's being bribed, that's no good. So he says, I'm taking your money and I generously give it to you to use. He's very hungry. He's not going to fund this thing himself. He's going to fund it with Haman's money. But he says, and now I give it back to you. He needs to be in the superior position. He needs to be in the position of power all the way through the Megillah. There's more you can do with this throughout Megillah Esther, but that's the respect. That's the respect front. He has to be in the power position. He has to be above, and he'll do anything to take down anybody who doesn't show him respect. And then there's also the security issue. Now, to be fair, he has reason to fear for his security, right? Early on in the Megillah, Bigtan and Teresh try to kill him. Let's not forget that. But perhaps the best example of his insecurity, meaning not insecurity psychologically, but feeling of lack of safety, is when he elevates Haman. Right? What was Haman before he was elevated? In the Megillah itself, Pshat, straight read. What was Haman before chapter 3 when he is elevated? Nothing. We had a list of the advisors, the key people. And it's true that there is one view in the Medrash that says that one of them, Memuchan, is also Haman, right? What's fueling that Medrash? Can't possibly believe that Haman came out of nowhere. It can't be that he just came out of nowhere and suddenly he is the head. However, worth recognizing, other views in the Medrash say no, that Memuchan is actually Daniel. If you look at Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer, Memuchan is not Haman at all. It's just the opposite. Haman is a political nobody. When Achashverosh is worried for his safety, because Bigtan and Teresh tried to kill him, he says, you know what? I am putting somebody in charge of the entire empire. He is going to report just to me. And you know, I'm going to take somebody who is a nobody. He has no network. Nobody for me to be afraid of. He reports to me. He owes everything to me. Wow, does this sound like anybody? Never mind. If you take a look at source number 12, you even have the line in the Gemara that says Haman was a barber. Right? No offense. I mean, I like barbers. But you take him and you make him really the person in charge of the greatest empire on earth. That's what you do. And we noted, of course, picking the unknown Esther as well. He wants somebody who has no allies, which is why he has a policy that nobody gets into the throne room uninvited. Right? Haman shows up and has to wait outside. Even Haman. Which is why also when Esther comes to him and says, I have a request, right? He says, up to 50%. Up to 50%. I retain voting rights. Does anybody seriously think that Esther was coming up to him and asking him for the entire empire? Does anyone seriously think that what was on her mind was, I want the entire empire, and Achashverosh needed to say to her, oh no, only up to half? Obviously not. Achashverosh knows she's not asking for the entire empire. This is Achashverosh's version of romance. This is Achashverosh on Valentine's Day. He says, honey, I adore you, I love you so much. I'll give you anything, up to 50% of what I have. Because he's so afraid. This is his nature. And Esther takes advantage of it, right? She invites Haman to a party, not once, but twice, so that Achashverosh will become jealous of Haman, and so that she can make the accusation and get Achashverosh to act immediately. And Haman won't have a chance to negotiate. Over and over and over again in the Megillah, Achashverosh displays this fear for his safety. Was Mordechai ever rewarded? You know that story, right? We don't need to go through that story in depth here. Rabbi Bergman already pointed out the business about the crown, and will he allow the crown or not allow the crown? The Gemara I brought you in number 14, Achashverosh comes back in after he heard the accusation against Haman and he walked out to his orchard to cool off. He walks back in and he sees Haman there. And Haman was knocked down by a malach onto the bed, playing again on that fear. That's what the Gemara is trying to highlight. What does Achashverosh do with all of this hunger? He's a man who is hungry for respect. He is a man who feels unsafe. So what he does is he schemes. He plots. He's forever looking for a way to feed his hunger, a way that he is going to be able to safeguard his position. That's why there's a classic Gemara, which I brought you here in source number 15. The classic one. Is Achashverosh a wise king or is Achashverosh a foolish king? If we had time, I would go through this in depth, but I'm going to just say it for you outside of the text. The Gemara, when it discusses this, first of all, you should know it also discusses this regarding Sancheiriv, the Assyrian king. Side note. But when the Gemara does this regarding Achashverosh, the way it does it is this. It asks the question, why did he have a party for all the leaders from his kingdom, and then afterwards a party for the locals? And the Gemara says, well, you could read it as really smart. The locals are his base. He's not worried about the base. He's going to first bring in everybody else, and then he'll cater to the base later. They can wait. That's one way to look at it. And so he's very sharp. The other way to look at it is, no, he's foolish. He should have taken care of the base first, and what he did was a tactical error by going instead for everybody else before he took care of his base. But either way within the Gemara, whether he's smart or whether he's foolish, whether he's clever or whether he's clueless, doesn't make a difference. The bottom line is, the Gemara is reading him as somebody who's thinking. He's plotting. Nothing he does is by accident. He may not be smart about it, but it's always with a tactic. And when he feels threatened, he lashes out. I brought you a quote from Dr. Shlomo Reimer in number 16 about the absence of emotional security always tends to spawn hate. The combination of emotional insecurity and hate invariably gives rise to a personality trait in which aggression is practiced for the express purpose of bolstering security. That's who he is. and the message, I think, of the book of Achashverosh, now we're talking not just chapter 10, but beginning 10, is that it provides a lesson for every generation about how we respond to fear and tension. The protagonist is Achashverosh. He experiences conflict, he experiences problems. Now, the truth is, every good story presents a hero. The hero has conflict, the hero has problems, and then they grow through that. They're supposed to have some kind of a growth experience that leads them to respond in a positive way, but not Achashverosh. He responds to the conflict and the problems by lashing out, feeding himself, striking at his enemies, lowering this one, raising that one. Perek Yud, chapter 10, tells us that Achashverosh is the same person he was at the start. Even appointing Mordechai tells us that story. What credentials does Mordechai have, besides the fact that he saved him from Bigtan and Teresh? I saved the king's life, and I'm a relative of the queen he trusts. That makes me second in command in the kingdom? What are you kidding? Achashverosh is the same person he was before. It's his hunger for security. And I think that's what the Megillah is telling us with the tax and the rest of the 10th parak. At the end of the Megillah, Achashverosh has learned no lessons. He remains who he was all along. Somebody seeking validation, somebody taking from everybody in pursuit of satisfying his needs. Now, that's nice, but why do I need a story like that in Tanakh? Why is that in Tanakh? The answer, of course, is it's not about Achashverosh, it's about us and what we are supposed to take away from it. Because you contrast Achashverosh's arc with our arc. We also start the book with a lack of respect, right? Denizens of the Persian Empire. We also start the book with a lack of security. Haman can do what he wants. We undergo conflict, we undergo problems, but in the conclusion of the book, we have become a new nation. Rabbim me'amei ha'aretz misyahadim, the nations feared us. They wanted to become us. Mordechai, Mishneh LaMelech. And why did we go one way while Achashverosh went the other way? Because what we did in the middle. Achashverosh responded to his fears and his appetites by grasping for control and taking for himself. How did Mordechai and Esther respond to their lack of security, lack of safety, to their hunger? What did they do? They turned to Hashem for support. Right? They acted selflessly. Esther allowed herself to be taken to the king against her better interests. Mordechai told Esther about the plot of Bigtan and Teresh to protect Achashverosh. They acted for others. The nation fasts for 3 days, an act of prayer to Hashem. Esther endangers herself going to the king. And this is highlighted at the end of the Megillah as well. Because Mordechai is described how? Doresh tov le'amo v'dover shalom l'chol zaro. He is looking out for others. He seeks not to take, but to give. And that to me is the message here. Achashverosh in Perek Yud, Achashverosh in chapter 10, is the same guy he was in the beginning. The same hungers, the same fears, and all he does is try to take for himself, and that's why he has a problem. Whereas the Jews in that position of hunger and fear look to act for others. They learn a lesson from it. They also appeal to Hashem. And the result is that they become something very different along the way. I think there's a lot to be said for that, more perhaps on another occasion. But for now, I also wish you a freilich and Purim, laYehuda Maisa Ora, v'simcha, v'sason, v'ikar, Ein Tehiyah.
Good morning. Once again, Brishus, my teachers and colleagues at the Kollel and all of you. First of all, thank you to Bnai Torah and all those involved in hosting this wonderful PrePurim Learnathon, and thanks to all of you for coming out to join us. As we mentioned, this should serve as an Ilum Shama for Pesach David Ben Avram, Paul Foreman, Zichron Livracha. Just a couple of notes about upcoming programs. Number one, just later on this week, on Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m. at the Bayit, I will be giving a pre-Purim shiur there as well, so if you don't have your Purim fix just from this morning, you're welcome to come out to that at 7:30 in the Simcha Suite at the Bayit. The topic is V'nahafav, who was Mordechai, the villain of the Purim story, and you're all more than welcome. Men, women, children are all welcome to come out there. Also, when you look past Purim, And even if you have had your Purim fix, we do have a number of programs coming up throughout the city, including our Haggadah nights, where you can hear Divrei Torah for your Seder, 10 minutes or less. Those will be taking place at Bayit on Tuesday, March 24th, as well as Shari Shemaim on Wednesday, March 18th. And once again, looking forward to seeing any and all of you there. You know, when Rabbi Hecht gave his shir a little bit earlier and he was talking about how much he loved history, I guess I was influenced by that even before I heard it. Because although my shir is a halacha shir, it does touch on a lot of history. And I think it would be nice to kick it off, if I can ask people if they feel comfortable. Was anybody here in this room alive 73 years ago? If you could just raise your hands for a moment, if you're okay with that. Okay, now how many of you remember 73 years ago? Does anybody here remember 73 years ago? So 73 years ago would have been the year of, anybody can do the calculation in their head offhand? 1947. What is significant about 1947 is what was taking place in Israel at that time. Who was in control of the land of Israel? The British. There was the British mandate ruling over many, many different parts of Palestine, Israel, whatever you would have called it at the time. And there was a very interesting halachic query poster of Ovadia Yosef, who at that time was actually in his 20s. And here's the question that he was asked as we open in source number 1. I'm going to read the Hebrew for those of you who will appreciate the Hebrew puns. Never explain a joke, so if you get the Hebrew puns, great. If not, I'm not explaining them. But he asked the following question, Yerushalayim Adar Tafshin Zayin. Nish'alti, he says, I was asked, Biyot Shem Emshelet HaMandate Shel Britannia, being that the British mandate, Hitila Aleinu has imposed upon us, Kol Yirakodesh Yerushalayim Tibaneh V'Tigonein, here in the city, holy city of Jerusalem, may it be built. Otzer Chamur Me'erev Ad Boker. At that point, in 1947, there was a very strict curfew. From when it became dark until when it became light in the morning, no one was allowed out in the streets. And as he says, V'hameferet ha'otzar yaro yiyareh. Anybody who would violate the curfew, might be shot. And he continues, V'nit kayem bahem otzer v'lo b'mishpat b'chatzi amav ya'azvenu, which I didn't translate because it's a pun based on a verse, but that doesn't really affect the question. However, he says, they wanted to know Im efshar likroat ha-Megillah b'tzibur mib'od yom achar plag ha-mincha. We know that the Megillah, the night reading of the Megillah, should be done at night, which means after dark at some point, usually the time that we refer to as Seit HaKochavim, when the stars come out some significant amount of time after sunset, that's when we read the night reading of the Megillah. So these people wanted to know, there's kind of this problem here. We have a curfew, and we can't get together to go to shul at nighttime. It's too dangerous. So is it better for us to read the Megillah early in a group, meaning we can leave while it's still daylight outside? It's true it's a little early, but for certain mitzvot, we acknowledge that it's considered night in some regard, even from an earlier time referred to as Plag HaMincha, which is approximately an hour and a quarter before sunset. So they asked Rabbi Yosef, who was a budding Talmid Chacham of the time, they said, hey, is it better that we should all gather together in shul and do the night reading before sunset, and then quickly run back home before the curfew starts? Or should we all try to read the Megillah sometime at night in our houses, on our own? And that was the question that was posed to him, and part of the central question that's being asked is, what is the status of the night reading of the Megillah? How lenient may we be with it? Does it allow for us to read it when it's not really night yet? Are there other leniencies that we would allow for the night reading as opposed to the day reading? Or do we say they're both really, really important? We have to read the Megillah at night, we have to read the Megillah at day, and there's no room for moving around on this? Granted, those are not the only factors to answering this question, but that's a real component of ruling on such a question. Can the Megillah be read early? Is what is the status of that night reading? So not only do we get our history in terms of Israeli history here, but we also are going to get a little bit into the history of this reading altogether. The key source, however, that we'll start with is the Gemara. It's a Gemara in Megillah 4a, and it cites Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. V'amar Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, and he says, Chayav Adam likrot et ha-Megillah balayla v'lichnota bayom. A person is required to read the Megillah at night and then to repeat it during the day, and he cites a verse, Shene'emar, Elokai yakra yomam v'lo taneh v'layla v'lo dumi ali. It's a verse from Tehillim, this particular chapter of Tehillim is associated with Esther because it begins Lam Natzach Al Ayelet HaShachar, which is supposedly referring to the story, and that's why we say, hey, it says that there was crying out, I call by day, but you do not answer, and at night there is no surcease for me, meaning I call out during the day, and I also call out at night, being that the Jews were praying to God not only during the day, but also at night. That means we should read the Megillah to thank God for saving us, not only during the day, but also at night. Okay? Now the Gemara actually continues to tell us a mistake that some people had made upon hearing this statement. The language that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi used was velishnota, to repeat it. However, says the Gemara, and I'll read the English translation here, some understood from it that one should read the Megillah at night and study its relevant tractate of Mishnah by day. Lishnota, in addition to meaning repeating, could also potentially mean to read the Mishnah. Lishnota, Mishnah, is very similar, and it says some students actually understood that, and Rabbi Yirmiyah said to them, it was explained to me personally by Rabbi Chia Bar Abba himself, that the term Lishnota here has a different connotation. For example, as people say, I will conclude this section and, again, Lishnota, and repeat it. Okay, the Gemara then brings another version saying that we have to read the Megillah at night, and this is from Rabbi Chelvo in the name of Ula Bira'a, and they say a person is obligated to read the Megillah at night and then repeat it during the day, and they bring a different verse, Lima'an mitamercha chavod v'lo yidom, so that my glory may sing praise to you and not be silent. So there's one praise during the day, and we are not silent, meaning we read it another time in the night. Both of these sources indicate that there is an important requirement to read the Megillah at night. And it seems pretty straightforward. Just as we say, based on the Megillah, there's a requirement to read the Megillah during the day. We have different verses in Megillah Esther that seem to tell us that. So too these verses from these different Psalms tell us that we have to read the Megillah at night. Okay. We can work with that. It's then pretty straightforward. We've got to read the Megillah at night. We've got to read the Megillah at day. They're pretty much equivalent obligations. But there's a problem. And here is the problem. If you look in chapter 2 of the Mishnah of Megillah, something which, of course, predates the Talmud's discussion, you see much discussion about the time that the Megillah should be read. And I've taken selections from 3 different Mishnayot in Mishnah Megillah without cutting out anything that relates to the time of their reading. And essentially, what it refers to, it says, the Megillah can only be read from the time that the sun rises. However, technically speaking, if you did it earlier, that's okay. And that you can read the Megillah any time during the entire day. And then it tells us a list of things that can be done at night. Guess what's lacking on the list of things that can be done at night? Megillah reading. That's not great for us. One second, if we think that there's this equivalent obligation that started, that just like you have to read the Megillah during the day the whole time, just so too you have to read the Megillah at night, that's a bit of a problem. Why is it only mentioned in the Mishnah, seeming to be a day mitzvah, if in fact it really is something that is meant to be read at night? And not only is it only mentioned as during the day, we even give a list of mitzvot that we do during the night, such as reaping the omer, burning fat and limbs on the altar, and no mention of Megillah. And the truth is that the Talmud really asks this question. The Talmud basically says, hey, why is it that you can read the Megillah anytime during the day? This is source number 4. You're welcome to follow along inside, but for the sake of time, we're going to read a little bit more outside. And the Talmud says the source for reading it during the day is because if you look in the Megillah, it says, V'hayamim ha'ele nizkarim v'na'asim. It specifically refers to days. It doesn't refer to nights. So ask the Gemara, Lema tehave teyufta Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. Why don't we then say that this refutes the opinion that we mentioned before, that the Megillah has to be read at night? Couldn't this be brought as evidence that the Megillah can't be read at night, and that therefore we should not follow the view of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi? And says the Talmud, no. This was only referring to the day reading that the Mishnah was talking about. So really, yes, there is a night reading. There was a night reading back in the time of the Mishnah as well, but these Mishnayot only refer to the night reading. Okay, to the day reading, my apologies. So therefore, again, there was a night reading, these Mishnayot only refer to the day reading. Okay, we can accept that. Granted, you'd like to hear some sort of explanation as to why that might be, and we will get to that in a moment. But we have a bigger problem first. If you look at the Tosefta, which are other teachings from the time of the Mishnah that were recorded and kept for us in the form of what we call Braitot, but this is in the Tosefta. Look what it says there. Here is the additional material to the Mishnah, also from other Tanaim. Kar'a balayla lo yatsa yedei chovato. If one read the Megillah at night, they have not fulfilled their obligation. And the Tosefta then brings a story and says, hey, are you really sure about that? Amar Rabbi Yossi ma'aseh Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri shekar'a b'tzipori balayla. Rabbi Yossi said, hey, wasn't there some story where Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri actually read the Megillah at night, and like that was the main reading of the Megillah for that Purim? And they responded to him, the rabbis responded to him and said, Ein shat sakana raya. That was at a time of danger. They weren't able to read it during the day. They were only able to read it at night. That's why that works. What does this Tosefta clearly indicate? That they didn't have a night reading back at that time. So now, we could technically answer the Tosefta in line with the Mishnah and say that the Tosefta is saying that the main reading is the day reading, and that if you only read at night, then you won't have fulfilled your obligation of Megillah reading, because the main reading is during the day. So let's get a little bit back to the background of that. Why is it that the reading of the day is different? And do we see that it has a different status? Might it have come along at a different time? How can we answer these questions? So for that we turn to the Ritva. There are various Rishonim that comment on these different sections in the Talmud, and that come to generally explain very, very similar things, citing similar authorities. Ritva, I thought, was very appropriate in terms of his approach here, because of the way he presented the general view of many, many others along with him. And he cites Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbi Yaakov Tam, one of the Tosafists, that the halachos that come out from this are very interesting. There is a difference here between Sfardim and Ashkenazim, and we are going within the Ashkenazi tradition right now, following Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam says, although we say that you have to read the Megillah at night, and that technically speaking, when one recites a Shehecheyanu, the bracha on us reaching this time, which we'll generally recite over a mitzvah, one would think that therefore the first time you read the Megillah, we should recite the Shehecheyanu blessing, and the second time you read the Megillah, well, we've already made our Shehecheyanu on that event. Says Rabbeinu Tam, no. The day reading is more legitimate in some way, and therefore you will even recite the Shehecheyanu on the day reading, even though you've already recited it at night. Meaning, the day reading seems to be on a higher level in some way than that night reading. And Ritva goes on, we'll read through some of the English here, and he says, Rabbi Yaakov Tam wrote that even so, when he rereads the Megillah during the day, he recites Shehecheyanu as the day reading is not lesser than the night reading. The opposite is true. The main reading is during the day, and it says days in the Megillah, as we mentioned, V'ayamim ha'ela nizkarim v'na'asim, which implies that specifically the day is the main reading, just as we say about the meal. The Purim meal needs to take place during the day. And he says the Tana also taught it plainly in listing the things that are valid during the day. And he uses the Mishnah that we brought as evidence to say that yes, the day reading is the main reading. Therefore, we've been ignoring the night reading in the Mishnah. We've ignored the night reading in the Tosefta, not because it wasn't taking place, but because its status is on a lower level. And he even goes on to say that he thinks this has halachic implications. There are many relevant halachos to Megillah reading. One of them is that it's ideal to gather a minyan. And there are sometimes when a minyan is actually even required in order to recite a blessing over Megillah reading, but that's not really relevant in our days in Chutz La'aretz. However, Ritva himself notes that what about the villages? There were various villages whom the Mishnah explains if they would come into the main cities on the Mondays and Thursdays, they would actually be allowed to read the Megillah earlier. Meaning, if let's say Purim fell out on a Tuesday, the 14th of Adar was on a Tuesday, these villages would actually be allowed to come in for their regular city visits on Monday and read the Megillah on that day. So many people ask, what did they do with the night reading? If their only way to hear the Megillah was when they were in the main city, perhaps the main city had a Megillah, perhaps the main city had a good Baal Koreh who could lane for them. So what did they do about the night reading? So Ritva says, I'll tell you, some others, not Ritva, say they didn't read it at night at all. He suggests that they actually read it, but that there was no requirement to get a minyan together. You could read it in your house. And since these villagers normally didn't have a minyan, they would come into the main city to have a good balkore, a good minyan. They didn't need to do that by night because the night reading is a lesser obligation. What's the problem with saying that it's not as important though? How did the Talmud derive that we have the night reading altogether? It was from verses. How can we just dispatch what the Gemara has brought us from Sefer Tehillim and say, the night reading is not really that important anyways? And the answer is, if you look in the Turei Even, which is a later commentary on Megillah there, he explains that yes, on the one hand, really the entire holiday of Purim is rabbinic in nature, but we actually give it a slightly higher status. We give it the status of what we call Divrei Kabbalah. It was something that was inspired by Ruach HaKodesh, and things that are written in Megillah are like a Derabanan plus. In certain ways, they are treated like a biblical mitzvah because it appears in Tanakh. Therefore, it has a special status. However, says Turei Even, when the Talmud came forward and cited these verses from Psalms, from Tehillim, to say, Hashem Elokai le'olam odeka, I'm not going to cease just reading the Megillah by day, I'm also going to read it at night. Just as I cried out during the day, I also cry out at night. The Talmud was not saying that we derive the reading from those verses, but rather, this is a nice hint to remind us of why we should be reading the Megillah, but really says Turei Even, really, it's all rabbinic in nature. The day reading, which comes from the Megillah itself, that is rabbinic plus, and the night reading is only rabbinic. Therefore, it's on a lower scale in regards to what you can get away with. You don't necessarily need to have a minyan. You would need to make shehechayanu again when you read the day reading. Those are the different consequences of that reading being of a lower nature. And the truth is, this is a perfectly fine argument. This explains the discrepancy that we see between the earlier and later sources in the way that they related to the night reading of the Megillah. The earlier sources tended to talk about it less because it wasn't as important. It wasn't part of that original establishment of reading the Megillah, but was rather of a lower stature. And the later sources said, don't forget that we actually have this reading as well, and that it is still important. The problem is there are other sources that seem to indicate that its status is even worse and that it may not actually have been around even at the time of the Mishnah. At the time that we're saying it wasn't mentioned because of reason X, reason Y. Take a look at something like Masechet Sofrim. Masechet Sofrim is a very interesting tractate. It was composed later, it seems, than many other of the other Mishnahs that we have, perhaps even a few hundred years later. But it's interesting, they talk about the different customs of reading the Megillah. And Masechet Sofrim makes reference to the following customs. Makom shena'agu likrot et HaMegillah shnei yamim korim. In places that they had the custom to read the Megillah on both days, they should read it. Meaning, if people had the custom to read it on both the 14th and the 15th of Adar, they should read it on both days. And look at the next line. Laila vayom, in places where they have the custom to read it during the day and at night too, it says they should also read it. What does that imply? That this was certainly not a universal practice. Some places would read it only during the day, and some places would read it on the 14th and the 15th, and some places would also read it on the day and the night. Okay. Now, on the one hand, the simple reading of this Halacha and Masechet Sofrim does seem to indicate that. However, various commentaries note that this is a very questionable read and interpretation of the Masechet Sofrim for a number of reasons. One reason is that in terms of halacha, it's questionable as to one may recite a baracha, a blessing, over a custom, over a minhag. And if in fact this was only a custom that some places had to read the Megillah at night, how could we recite a blessing over it of Al Mikra Megillah? However, there are those who deal with that. A separate question is that there seems to have been a different section in Masechet Sofrim that Rabbi Levi is cited, who's likely the father of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, that Megillas Esther must be read at night, and that there was a custom to read it even at a different time. So they look at the internal evidence within Masechet Sofrim, say if in one chapter it says you have to read it at night, and another chapter it seems to say that there's a custom to read it at night, that doesn't quite fit. And in fact, there are those who remove the word korin, one of the two korins, and that way they say, if they had the custom to read it on the 14th and 15th, they should read it on the night and the day of each of those days. And that really the only thing that was contingent on custom was reading it both on the 14th and on the 15th. But in fact, that there was never any question about whether or not it was read at night. That's how some interpret it. But nevertheless, the simple read, as acknowledged by many of the commentaries, is that this was still a custom at a later point in time. Additionally, we have a very interesting passage in the Talmud Yerushalmi. The Talmud Yerushalmi quotes not Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, but the second authority that we have in the Talmud Bavli, if you wish to compare back to source number 2, but I'm just going to read source number 11 inside, in the English, Ula Bira'a Rabbi Lazar, in the name of Rabbi Hanina. So Ula Bira was the second group of Amoraim who mentioned it in the Bavli. They say, Ragil tzarich likrota balayla v'lishnota bayom. A person who regularly reads the Megillah must do so at night and again during the day. And then we have an equivalent passage where it talks about, oh, they thought that it meant to learn the Mishnah and really it meant to read it again. The question is, what does this word ragil mean? Again, they said, someone who is ragil needs to repeat the Megillah at night and at day. So it's very interesting. The commentaries there struggle because you don't normally see words like this come up in a section where we say someone who is regular to do a mitzvah should do the mitzvah this way, and someone who is not regular to do the mitzvah should do a mitzvah another way. So much so that there was even a suggestion in source number 12 that the person's name was Rabbi Hanina Ragil. And that they take out the word Ragil, they attach it to the name of the person who said it to say, Rabbi Hanina Ragil said that you need to read it at night and day, because Ragil doesn't seem to have a meaning. However, at the end of the day, most commentaries do admit that this seems to indicate that no, there were people that didn't have to read the Megillah at night as well, and it was only the Regilim, whatever that means. The way that Korban HaEdah explains it in source number 12 is that this was someone who wasn't proficient in reading the Megillah, so those who were proficient could read it at night, those who were not proficient would not read it at night. All of this building up, from the very first source all the way till now, are really leading us on a simple level towards the conclusion that there was not a universal custom to read the Megillah at night until later on in our history, and this is not something that started as early as we think. Whether it's the opinion in the Tosefta, whether it's the Mishnah omitting any mention of it, whether it's the fact we don't know what the story of the Kfarim, of the villagers who were entering the city, did in this regard, whether it was these last sources that we've mentioned now, the Masechet Sofrim, which seems to indicate so, whether it was the Yerushalmi, which seems to indicate that some people didn't have this reading. And the truth is, this is a legitimate opinion. In fact, Rabbi Shlomo of Vilna, the Binyan Shlomo, in his responsa, number 58, who was the author of the Cheshek Shlomo on the Talmud, who lived in the late 1800s, went so far as to say that this was actually created by Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, that prior to this time, meaning during the time of the Mishnah, during the time of the Tosefta, and even in the early period of the Amoraim, there was no reading at night, and the reason why the Bavli cites this from Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi is because he invented it. And that's how far he goes with this, and this is a legitimate opinion. However, obviously people don't like it. They try to reject it based on a couple of different points. I'll put two forward as we finish up here and want to wrap up. One point that people put forward is that would have been a very easy answer for the Gemara. If you look back in source number 4, okay, a couple of pages back, the Gemara cited the Mishnah that mentioned only the day reading and said, why don't we use this to refute Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi? So what should our answer have been? Of course we refute Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. There was no night reading then. And the Gemara doesn't seem comfortable saying that. So that's one point. They look at other sources as well, but that's not really what I want to explore. I want to take it one step further and look a little bit at the history of this. And this is really brought to the forefront by Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Franz in his responsa in source number 13, or Achaim 2:120. And he really raises the historical question as follows. He says, it is difficult to say that in the days of Mordechai and Esther and throughout the Second Temple and Tannaitic periods, extending over 600 years, the Megillah was not read at night. And here's the question which I think really frames the last few minutes of this year. Is it possible that during the glory years of Jerusalem, no authority found it wise to legislate this ordinance, but that in the post-destruction era the sages felt it necessary to do so? Why? Asked Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank. Let's assume for a moment that yes, Rabbi Shlomo of Vilna is correct, or as we've been trying to show, that yes, this is a custom that developed over time and may not have been present in the times of the Mishnah. What would have been the reason for adding this? Why wasn't it added earlier, and why was it added later? And I think we can come up with 3 suggestions to conclude this year. Suggestion number 1, does anybody have any indication from an earlier source as to why we might have instituted a night reading of the Megillah?
It's dangerous to do it during the day.
Very good. We mentioned in the Tosefta earlier, thank you, that there was a period of time when they had to read the only Megillah reading at night, and they were unable to do it during the day, and we said that that was good enough. Like many other practices in Judaism, perhaps in order to commemorate those times where we could not read the Megillah by day, and we were only able to read it at night, perhaps that was instituted. I'm hesitant to say that, however, despite the fact that it does have a historical basis in the Tosefta, because the Tosefta was clearly aware of this, and still they did not have the night reading after that. It would still be strange to say, if we're in a time of danger when we have to read the Megillah at night, that only 200 or 300 years later, we'll create a remembrance of that. One would have expected that after the danger was over, namely still in the Mishnaic period, that they would have established such a reading, but I think that that has some merit. Additionally, if you look at source number 14, we see the way this is developed halachically by Rav Soloveitchik. Again, not enough time to go through right now, but in summary, what he talks about is the reality of this reading being a reading which is meant to prepare one for reading the Megillah the following day. And we can say, therefore, that this would have been almost as utility. Perhaps Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, or those that instituted this reading, felt that people weren't properly prepared for the day reading, and they said, you know what, maybe it's a better idea to get people prepared for the day reading by establishing a night reading, which is why there is an element of repetition. It's not just reading the Megillah at night, but you have to repeat it at day. Having the day reading be a second reading could have been a way of strengthening something that had become a little bit lax at a later period of time, and that's also a possible historical reason. But a final reason given by Rabbi Evan Hoffman in his article on this topic, I think really is a nice message that we can take away for Purim. If you look at the second paragraph that we have there, the embellishment and extension of Purim should come as no surprise. The Jewish masses, often terrorized by our enemies, like the idea of celebrating victory over our would-be murderers and doing so in carnivalesque fashion. The Talmud considers the Megillah reading to be a rare example of a beloved mitzvah, kevan dechaviva, a holiday that was initially scorned by various Jewish factions, became an important annual observance because it successfully mixes entertainment and Jewish pride. Putting aside the scorning by Jewish factions, I think what we have to say here is that it's possible that this reading was amplified at a later time because we started celebrating Purim in a greater fashion. And he really hammers this out, but I think that we can say that this, in fact, is the idea of limani zamercha chavod velo yidom. We had one Megillah reading and we said, you know what, that's not enough. We need to thank Hashem again. We need a second reading. We need a night reading. And that was something that developed over time as we came to love and to thank Hashem more and more and more. It wasn't the original ordinance, and that's really what made it such a wonderful outpouring of praise to have the second Megillah reading develop over time when we said, one is not enough for us, we need to thank Hashem again and again. May we continue to celebrate and embellish Purim and to add to our celebrations till the coming of Mashiach Mihira B'Yameinu Amen. Thank you again all for coming out. And
Thank
What happened in
you.
1947? What was the answer? What was the answer in 1947?
oh, the answer at the end of the day, sorry, I had that in at some point. The answer at the end of the day was that they are allowed to read the Megillah early in public, although that hinged on a particular other response.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you to Alan and to Bnei Torah. Please make sure to take some refreshments. And we continue to learn together and to celebrate together.